Good evening, everyone. Happy last day of school. Bittersweet, but the summer should be a good time. Let's get right to it because I think this chapter is pretty long. So, we got a couple pages into chapter 7 last night, and in that chapter, Scarlet returned, Rod's friend from when he was 4 and she was 5. Scarlet is her parents divorced, and so she's back in town with her mom. She's not happy about it, and she gets lost trying to get home after school and finds herself in the graveyard with this old guy. Um, the old guy is doing grave rubbings, and we don't know why he's there, um, except for the grave rubbings, and he's a history buff. So he gives her a ride home and then gets a dinner date with her mom. But then we learn that, what was I going to say? Their mom isn't happy that Scarlet made her way back to the graveyard. Um, Now Bod is looking around the graveyard and he goes to the poet to ask him advice about women. So the poet tells him to go to her and talk to her, and then he's talking about revenge, and that's right where we're at. All right. But you got revenge on him? Asked Bod, curious. On him and on his entire pestilent breed. Oh, I had my revenge, Master Owens, and it was a terrible one. I wrote and had published a letter, which I nailed to the doors of the public houses in London, where such low scribbling folk were wont to frequent, and I explained that, given the fragility of the genius poetical, I would henceforth write not for them, but only for myself and posterity, and that I should, as long as I lived, publish no more poems for them. Thus I left instructions that upon my death my poems were to be buried with me unpublished, and only when posterity realized my genius, realized that hundreds of my verses had been lost, only then was my coffin to be disinterred, only then could my poems be removed from my cold, dead hand, to finally be published to the approbation and delight of all. It is a terrible thing to be ahead of your time. And after you died, they dug you up and they printed the poems. Not yet, no. But there's still plenty of time. Posterity is vast. So that was your revenge, indeed, and a mightily powerful and cunning one at that. Yes, said Bod, unconvinced. Best served cold, said Nehemiah Trot proudly. Bod left the northwest of the graveyard, returned through the Egyptian walk to the more orderly paths and untangled ways, and as dusk fell, he wandered back towards the old chapel, not because he hoped Silas had returned from his travels, but because he had spent his life visiting the chapel at dusk, and it felt good to have a rhythm. And anyway, he was hungry. Bod slipped through the crypt door, down into the crypt. He moved a cardboard box filled with curled and damp parish papers and took out a carton of orange juice, an apple, a box of breadsticks, and a block of cheese, and he ate while pondering how and whether he would seek out Scarlet. He would dream walk, perhaps, since that was how she had come to him. He headed outside, was on his way to sit on the gray wooden bench when he saw something and he hesitated. There was someone already there, sitting on his bench. She was reading a magazine. Bob faded even more, became a part of the graveyard, no more important than a shadow or a twig. But she looked up, she looked straight at him, and she said, Bob, is that you? He said nothing. Then he said, Why can you see me? I almost couldn't. At first I thought you were a shadow or something, but you looked like you did in my dream. You sort of came into focus. He walked over to the bench. He said, You can actually read that? Isn't it too dark for you? Scarlet closed the magazine. She said, It's odd. You'd think it would be too dark, but I could read it fine. No problem. Are you? He trailed off, uncertain of what he wanted to ask her. Are you here on your own? She nodded. I helped Mr. Frost do some grave rubbings after school, and then I told him I wanted to sit and think here for a bit. When I'm done here, I promise to go and have a cup of tea with him, and he'll run me home. He didn't even ask why. He just said he loved sitting in graveyards too, and that he thinks they can be the most peaceful places in the world. Then she said, "Can I hug you? Do you want to?" said Bob. "Yes." "Well, then," he thought for a moment, "I don't mind if you do. My hands won't go through you or anything. You're really there." "You won't go through me," he said, and she threw her arms around him and squeezed him so tightly he could barely breathe. He said, "That hurts." Scarlet let go. "Sorry." "No, it was nice. I mean, you just squeezed me more than I was expecting. I just wanted to know if you were real. All these years I thought you were just something in my head, and then I sort of forgot about you. But I didn't make you up, and you're back. You're in my head, and you're in the world too." Bob smiled. He said, "You used to wear a sort of coat. It was orange, and whenever I saw that particular orange color, I'd think of you. I don't suppose you still have the coat." "No," she said, "not for a long time. It would be a wee bit too small for me now." "Yes," said Bob, "of course." "I should go home," said Scarlet. "I thought I could come up on the weekend, though." And then, seeing the expression on Bob's face, she said, "Today's Wednesday. I'd like that." She turned to go. Then she said, "How will I find you next time?" Bob said, "I'll find you. Don't worry. Just be on your own, and I'll find you." She nodded and was gone. Bod walked back to the graveyard and up the hill until he reached the Frobisher mausoleum. He did not enter it. He climbed up the side of the building using the thick ivy root as a foothold, pulled himself up onto the stone roof where he sat and thought, looking out at the world of moving things beyond the graveyard, and remembered that the way the Scarlet had held him and how safe he had felt, if only for a moment, and how fine it would be to walk safely in the lands beyond the graveyard, and how good it was to be master of his own small world. Scarlet said that she didn't want a cup of tea, thank you, or a chocolate biscuit. Mr. Frost was concerned. Honestly, he told her, "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Well, a graveyard, not a bad place to see one. If you were going to, I had an aunt once who claimed her parrot was haunted. She was a scarlet macaw. The parrot, the aunt was the architect. Never knew the details." "I'm fine," said Scarlet. "It was just a long day. Give you a lift home then. Any idea what this says?" Puzzling over it half an hour, he indicated a grave rubbing on the little table, held flat by a jam jar on each corner. "Is that name Gladstone, do you think?" "Could be a relative of the Prime Minister, but I can't make out anything else." "Afraid not," said Scarlet, "but I'll take another look when I come out on Saturday." "Is your mother likely to make an appearance?" "She said she'd drop me off here in the morning, then she has to go and get groceries for our dinner. She's cooking a roast chicken." "Do you think," asked Mr. Frost hopefully, "there are likely to be roast potatoes?" "I expect so, yes." Mr. Frost looked delighted. Then he said, "I wouldn't want to put her out of her way. I mean, she's loving it," said Scarlet truthfully. "Thank you for giving me a lift home." "More than welcome," said Mr. Frost. They walked together down the steps in Mr. Frost's high, narrow house to the little entrance hall at the bottom of the stairs. In Krakow, on the Wawel Hill, there are caves called the Dragon's Den, named after a long-dead dragon. These are the caves that the tourists know about. There are caves beneath those caves that the tourists do not know, do not and ever get to visit. They go down a long way, and they are inhabited. Silas Silas went first, followed by the gray hugeness of Miss Lupuscu, padding quietly on 4 feet just behind him. Behind them was Kandar, a bandage-wrapped Assyrian mummy with powerful eagle wings and eyes like rubies, who was carrying a small pig. There had originally been four of them. They had lost Harun in a cave far above when There had originally been four of them, but they had lost Harun in a cave far above when the Ifrit, as naturally overconfident as well as are all of its race, had stepped into a space bounded by three polished bronze mirrors and had been swallowed up in a blaze of bronze light. In moments, the Ifrit could only be seen in the mirrors and no longer in reality. In the mirrors, his fiery eyes were wide open, his mouth was moving, as if he was shouting at them to leave and beware, and then he faded and was lost to them. Silas, who had no problems with mirrors, had covered one of them with his coat, rendering the trap useless. So, said Silas, now there are only three of us. And a pig, said Kandar. Why? Asked Miss Lupescu, with a wolf tongue through wolf teeth. Why the pig? It's lucky, said Kandar. Miss Lupescu growled, unconvinced. Did Haroun have a pig? Asked Kandar simply. Hush, said Silas. They are coming. From the sound of it, there are many of them. Let them come, whispered Kandar. Miss Lupescu's hackles were rising. She said nothing, but she was ready for them. And it was only by an effort of will that she did not throw back her head and howl. It's beautiful up this way, said Scarlet. Yes, said Bod. So your family were all killed, said Scarlet. Does anyone know who did it? No, not that I know. My guardian only says that the man who did it is still alive and that he'll tell me the rest of what he knows one day. One day, when I'm ready. What's he scared of? That you'd strap on your gun and ride out to wreak vengeance on the man who killed your family? Bod looked at her seriously. Well, obviously, he said. Not a gun, though. But yes, something like that. You're joking. Bod said nothing. His lips were tight, pressed together. He shook his head. Then he said, I'm not joking. It was a bright and sunny Saturday morning. They were just past the entrance to the Egyptian walk, out of the direct sunlight from the pines and the sprawling monkey puzzle tree. Your guardian, is he a dead person too? Bod said, I don't talk about him. Scarlet looked hurt. Not even to me, not even to you. Well, she said, be like that. Bod said, look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, just as Scarlet said, I promised Mr. Frost I wouldn't be too long. I better be getting back. Right, said Bod, worried he had offended her, unsure that what he should say to make anything better. He watched Scarlet head off on the winding path back to the chapel. A familiar female voice said, with derision, look at her, Miss High and Mighty. But there was no one to be seen. Bod, feeling awkward, walked back to the Egyptian walk. Miss Lilibet and Miss Violet had let him store a cardboard box filled with old paperback books in their vault, and he wanted to find something to read. Scarlet helped Mr. Frost with his grave rubbings until midday. When they stopped for lunch, he offered to buy her fish and chips as thank you, and they walked down to the fish and chip shop at the bottom of the road. And as they walked back up the hill, they ate their steaming fish and chips, drenched in vinegar and glittering with salt, out of a paper bag. Scarlet said, if you wanted to find out about a murder, where would you look? I already tried the internet. Depends. What kind of murder are we talking about? Something local, I think. About 13 or 14 years ago, a family was killed around here. Crikey, said Mr. Frost. This really happened? Oh, yes. Are you all right? Not really. Bit of a wimp, really. Things like that. I mean, local true crime. You don't like to think about it. Things like that happening here. Not something I'd expect a girl of your age to be interested in. It's not actually for me, admitted Scarlet. It's for a friend. Mr. Frost finished off the last of his fried cod. The library, I suppose. If it's not on the internet, it'll be in their newspaper files. What set you off after this? Oh, Scarlet wanted to lie as little as possible, she said. A boy I know, he was asking about it. Definitely the library, said Mr. Frost. Murder. Brr. Give me the shivers. Me too, said Scarlet. A bit. Then hopefully, could you possibly drop me off at the library this afternoon? Mr. Frost bit a large chip in half, chewed it, and looked at the rest of the chip, disappointed. They get cold so fast, don't they? Chips. One minute they're burning your mouth on them, the next you're wondering how they cool off so quickly. I'm sorry, said Scarlet. You shouldn't be asking for rides everywhere. Not at all, said Mr. Frost, just wondering how best to organize this afternoon and whether or not your mother likes chocolates. Bottle of wine or chocolates? Not really sure. Both, maybe. I can make my own way home from the library, said Scarlet. She loves chocolates. So do I. Chocolates it is, then, said Mr. Frost, relieved. They had reached the middle of the row of high terraced houses on the hill, and the little green Minnie parked outside. Get in. I'll run you over to the library. The library was a square building, all brick and stone, dating back to the beginning of the last century. Scarlett looked around and then went up to the desk. The woman said, "Yes." Scarlett said, "I want to see some old newspaper clippings." "Is it for school?" said the woman. "It's local history," said Scarlett, nodding proud that she hadn't actually lied. "We've got the local paper on microfiche," said the woman. She was large and had silver hoops in her ears. Scarlett could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She was certain she looked guilty or suspicious. The woman led her into a room with boxes that looked like computer screens and showed her how to use them to project a page of the newspaper at a time onto the screen. "One day I will have to digitize them," said the woman. "Now, what dates are you after?" "About 13 or 14 years ago," said Scarlett. "I can't be more specific than that." The woman gave Scarlett 5 years worth of newspapers on microfiche. "Go wild," she said. Scarlett assumed that the murder of a family would have been front page news, but instead, when she eventually found it, it was almost buried on page 5. It had happened in October, 13 years earlier. There's no color in the article, no description, just an understated list of events. Architect Ronald Dorian, 36, his wife Carlotta, 34, a publisher, and their daughter Misty were found dead at 33 Dunstan Road. Foul play is suspected. A police spokesman said it was too early to comment at this stage in their investigations, but that significant leads are being followed. There was no mention of how the family died, nothing said about a missing baby. In the weeks that followed, there was no follow-up. The police did not ever comment, not that Scarlett could see, but that was it. She was certain, 33 Dunstan Road. She knew the house. She had been in there. She knew the house. She had been in there. She returned the box of microfilm to the front desk, thanked the librarian, and walked home in the April sunshine. Her mother was in the kitchen cooking, not entirely successfully, judging from the smell of burnt bottom of the saucepan that filled most of the flat. Scarlett retreated to her bedroom and opened the windows wide to let the burnt smell out. Then she sat on her bed and made a phone call. "Hello, Mr. Frost?" "Scarlett, everything still all right for this evening? How's your mother?" "Oh, it's all under control," said Scarlett, which was what her mother had said when she had asked. "Now, Mr. Frost, how long have you lived in your house?" "How long?" "About, well, 4 months now." "How did you find it?" "Estate agent's window. It was empty and I could afford it. Well, more or less. Well, I wanted something within walking distance of the graveyard, and this was perfect." "Mr. Frost," Scarlett wondered how to say it, and then just said it. "About 13 years ago, 3 people were murdered in your house, the Dorian family." There was a silence at the other end of the phone. "Mr. Frost, are you there?" Still here, Scarlett. Sorry. Not the sort of thing you expect to hear. It's an old house, I mean. You expect things to happen a long time ago, but not. Well, what happened?" Scarlett wondered how much she could tell him. She said there was a little piece on it in an old newspaper. It only gave the address and nothing else. I don't know how they died or anything. Good Lord, Mr. Frost sounded more intrigued by the news than Scarlett could have expected. "This, young Scarlett, is where we local historians come into our own. Leave it with me. Find out everything I can and report back." "Thank you," said Scarlett, relieved. I assume this phone call is because if Nuna thought there were murders going on in my home, even 13-year-olds, you'd never be allowed to see me or my graveyard again. So, suppose I don't mention it. Thank you, Mr. Frost. See you at 7 with chocolates. Dinner was remarkably pleasant. The burnt smell had gone from the kitchen. The chicken was good, the salad was better, and the roast potatoes were too crispy. But a delighted Mr. Frost had proclaimed that this was precisely the way he liked them, and had taken a second helping. The flowers were popular. The chocolates, which they had for dessert, were perfect, and Mr. Frost sat and talked and watched television with them until 10 p.m., and he said he needed to get home. Time, tide, and historical research wait for no man, he said. He shook Nuna's hand with enthusiasm, winked at Scarlet conspiratorially and was out the door. Scarlet tried to find Bod in her dreams that night. She thought of him as she went to sleep, imagined herself walking the graveyard looking for him. But when she did dream, it was of wandering around Glasgow city centre with her friends from her old school. They were hunting for a specific street, but all they found was a succession of dead ends, one after another. Deep beneath the hill in Krakow, in the deepest vault beneath the caves they called the Dragon's Den, Miss Lupescu stumbled and fell. Silas crouched beside her and cradled Miss Lupescu's head in his hands. There was blood on her face, and some of it was hers. You must leave me, she said. Save the boy. She was halfway now, halfway between gray wolf and woman, but her face was a woman's face. No, said Silas, I won't leave you. Behind him, Kandar cradled its piglet like a child might hold a doll. The mummy's left wing was shattered, and it would never fly again, but its bearded face was implacable. They will come back, Silas, Miss Lupescu whispered. Too soon, the sun will rise. Then, said Silas, we must deal with them before they are ready to attack. Can you stand? Da, I am one of the hounds of God, said Miss Lupescu. I will stand. She lowered her face into the shadow, flexed her fingers. When she raised her head again, it was a wolf's head. She put her front paws down on the rock and laboriously pushed herself up into a standing position. A gray wolf bigger than a bear, her coat and muzzle flecked with blood. She threw back her head and howled a howl of fury and of challenge. Her lips curled back from her teeth, and she lowered her head once more. Now, growled Miss Lupescu, we end this. Late on Sunday afternoon, Late on Sunday afternoon, the telephone rang. Scarlett was sitting downstairs, laboriously copying faces from the manga she had been reading into scrap paper. Her mother picked up the phone. Funny, we were just talking about you, said her mother, although they hadn't been. It was wonderful, her mother continued. I had the best time. Honestly, it was no trouble. The chocolates, they were perfect. Just perfect. I told Scarlett to tell you anytime you want a good dinner, you just let me know. And then, Scarlett, yes, she's here. I'll put her on. Scarlett? I'm just here, Mom, said Scarlett. You don't have to shout. She took the phone. Mr. Frost? Scarlett, he sounded excited. The thing we were talking about, the thing that happened in my house, you can tell this friend of yours that I found out. Listen, when you said a friend of yours, did you mean it with the sense of we're actually talking about you, or is there a real person? If it's not a personal question. I've got a real friend who wants to know, said Scarlett, amused. Her mother shot a questioning look. Tell your friend that I did some digging, not literally, more like rummaging, well, a fair amount of actual looking around, and I think I might have unearthed some very real information. Stumbled over something hidden. Well, not something I think we should spread around. I found things out. Like what? Asked Scarlett. Look, don't think I'm mad, but well, as far as I can tell, 3 people were killed. One of them, the baby, I think, wasn't. It wasn't a family of 3. It was a family of 4. Only 3 of them died. Tell him to come and see me, your friend. I'll fill him in. I'll tell him, said Scarlett. She put the phone down, her heart beating like a snare. Bod walked down the narrow stone stairs for the first time in 6 years. His footsteps echoed in the chamber like inside the hill. He reached the bottom of the steps and waited for the sleer to manifest. And he waited and waited, but nothing appeared. Nothing whispered, nothing moved. He looked around the chamber, untroubled by the deep darkness, seeing it as the Dead Sea. He walked over to the altar, stone set in the floor, where the cup and the brooch and the stone knife sat. He reached down and touched the edge of the knife. It was sharper than he had expected, and it nicked the skin of his finger. It is the treasure of the Sleer, whispered a triple voice, but it sounded smaller than he remembered, more hesitant. Bod said, You're the oldest thing here. I came to talk to you. I want advice. A pause. Nothing comes to the Sleer for advice. The Sleer guards. Sleer waits. I know, but Silas isn't here, and I don't know who else to talk to. Nothing was said, just the silence in reply that echoed of dust and loneliness. I don't know what to do, Bob said honestly. I think I can find out about who killed my family, who wanted to kill me. It means leaving the graveyard, though. Sleer said nothing. Smoke tendrils twined slowly around the inside of the chamber. I'm not frightened of dying, said Bod. It's just so many so many people I care for have spent so much time keeping me safe, teaching me, protecting me. Again, silence. And he said, I have to do this on my own. Yes. That's all then. Sorry I bothered you. It whispered into Bod's head. Then, in a voice that was a sleek, insinuating glide, the Sleer was set to guard the treasure until our master returned. Are you our master? No, said Bod. Then, and then with a hopeful whine, will you be our master? I'm afraid not. If you were our master, we could hold you in our coils forever. If you were our master, we could keep you safe and protect you until the end of time and never let you endure the dangers of the world. I am not your master. No. Bod felt the sleer riding through his mind. It said, then find your name. And his mind was empty, and the room was empty, and Bod was alone. Bod walked back up the stairs carefully yet quickly. He had come to a decision and needed to act fast, while the decision still burned in his mind. Scarlett was waiting for him on the bench by the chapel. Well, she said. I'll do it. Come on, he said, and side by side they walked the path down to the graveyard gates. Number 33 was a tall house, spindly thin, in the middle of a terrace now. In the middle of a terraced row, excuse me. It was a red brick and unmemorable. Bob looked at it uncertainly, wondering why it did not seem familiar or special. It was only a house, like any other. There was a small concrete space in the front of it that wasn't a garden, a green Mini parked on the street. The front door had once been painted a bright blue, but it had been dimmed by sun and time. Well, said Scarlett. Bob knocked on the door. There was nothing. Then a clatter of feet on the stairs from inside. The door opened to reveal an entryway and stairs. Framed in the doorway was a bespectacled man with receding gray hair, who blinked at them and stuck out his hand to Bob and smiled nervously and said, You must be Miss Perkins' mysterious friend. Good to meet you. This is Bod, said Scarlett. Bob? Bod, with a D, she said. Bod, this is Mr. Frost. Bod and Mr. Frost shook hands. Kettle's on, said Mr. Frost. What say we swap information over a cuppa? They followed him up the steps to a kitchen where he poured 3 mugs of tea, then led them to a small sitting room. The house just keeps going, he said. The toilet's on the next floor up, and my office and bedrooms above that. Keeps you fit, all the stairs. They sat on a large, extremely purple sofa. It was already here when I came, and they sipped their tea. Scarlett had worried that Mr. Frost would ask Bod lots of questions, but he didn't. He just seemed excited, as if he had identified the lost gravestone of someone famous and desperately wanted to tell the world. He kept moving impatiently in his chair, as if he had something enormous to impart to them, and not blurting it out immediately was a physical strain. Scarlett said, So what did you find out? Mr. Frost said, Well, you were right. I mean, this was the house where those people were killed. And I think the crime was, well, not exactly hushed up, but forgotten about. Let go by the authorities. I don't understand, said Scarlett. Murders don't get swept under the carpet. This one was, said Frost. He drained his tea. There are people out there who have influence. It's the only explanation for that and for what happened to the youngest child. And what was that? Asked Bod. He lived, said Frost. I'm sure of it. But there wasn't a manhunt. A missing toddler normally would be national news, but they must have squashed it somehow. Who are they? Asked Bod. Same people who killed the family. Do you know any more than that? Yes, well, a little. Frost trailed off. I'm sorry. Look, given what I've found, it's all too incredible. Scarlet was starting to feel frustrated. What was? What did you find? Frost looked shamefaced. You're right. I'm sorry. Getting into keeping secrets, not a good idea. Historians don't bury things. We dig them up, show people. Yes. He stopped, hesitated. Then he said, I found a letter upstairs. It was hidden under a loose floorboard. He turned to Bod. Young man, would I be correct in assuming while your interest in this dreadful business is personal? Bod nodded. I won't ask any more, said Frost, and he stood up. Come on, he said to Bod. Not you, though, said to Scarlet. Not yet. I'll show him. If he says it's all right, I'll show you as well. Deal? Deal, said Scarlet. We won't be long, said Mr. Frost. Come on, lad. Bod stood up, darted a concerned look at Scarlet. It's okay, she said, and smiled at him as reassuringly as she could. I'll wait. She watched their shadows as they walked out of the room and up the stairs. She felt nervous but expectant. She wondered what Bod would learn, and was happy that he would learn it first. It was his story, after all. It was his right. Out on the stairs, Mr. Frost led the way. Bod looked around as he walked up toward the top of the house, but nothing seemed familiar. It all seemed strange. All the way to the very top, said Mr. Frost. They went up another flight of stairs, he said. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but, you're the boy, aren't you? Bod said nothing. Here we are, said Mr. Frost. He turned the key in the door at the top of the house, pushed it open, and they went inside. The room was small. The room was small. Sorry. The room was small and the attic room with a sloping ceiling. 13 years before, it had held a crib. It barely held the man and the boy. Stroke of luck, really, said Mr. Frost. Under my nose, so to speak. He crouched down, pulled back the threadbare carpet. So you know why my family were murdered? Asked Bod. Mr. Frost said, It's all in here. He reached down to a short length of floorboard and pushed at it until he was able to lever it out. This would have been the baby's room, said Mr. Frost. I'll show you the only thing we don't know is just who did it. Nothing at all. We don't have the tiniest clue. You know he has dark hair, said Bod, in the room that had once been his bedroom, and we know his name is Jack. Mr. Frost put his hand down into the empty space where the floorboard had been. It's been almost 13 years, he said, and hair gets thin and goes gray in 13 years, but yes, that's right, it's Jack. He straightened up. The hand that had been in the hole in the floor was holding a large, sharp knife. Now, said the man Jack. Now, boy, time to finish this. Bod stared at him. It was as if Mr. Frost had been a coat or a hat. It was as if Mr. Frost had been a coat or a hat the man had been wearing, that he had now discarded. The affable exterior had gone. The light glinted in the man's spectacles and on the blade of the knife. A voice called up to them from further down the stairs. Scarlet's. Mr. Frost, there's someone knocking at the front door. Should I get it? The man Jack only glanced away for a moment, but Bod knew that moment was all he had, and he faded, as completely, as utterly as he could. The man Jack looked back to where Bod had been, then stared around the room, puzzlement and rage completing on his face. He took a step further into the room, his head swinging from side to side like an old tiger scenting prey. You're here somewhere, growled the man Jack. I can smell you. Behind him, the little door to the attic bedroom slammed closed. As he swung around, he heard the key turn in the lock. The man Jack raised his voice. It buys you moments, but it won't stop me, boy, he called through the locked door. Then he added simply, We have unfinished business, you and I. Bod threw himself down the stairs, bouncing into walls, almost tumbling headlong in his rush to meet Scarlet. Scarlet, he said when he saw her. It's him. Come on. It's who? What are you talking about? Him. Frost. He's Jack. He tried to kill me. A bang from above as the man Jack kicked at the door. But Scarlet tried to make sense of what she was hearing. But he's nice.
No, said Bod, grabbing her hand and pulling her down the stairs into the hallway. No, he's not. Scarlet pulled open the front door. Ah, good evening, young lady, said the man at the door, looking down at her. We are looking for Mr. Frost. I believe this is his neck of the woods. He had silver white hair, and he smelled of cologne. Are you friends of his? She asked. Oh, yes, said a smaller man, standing just behind. He had a small black mustache and was the only one of the men to wear a hat. Certainly are, said a third, a younger man, huge and Nordic and blond. Every man jack of us, said the last man, wide and bull-like with a massive head. His skin was brown. Mr. Frost, he had to go out, she said. But his car's here, said the white-haired man, as the blond one said. Who are you, anyway? He's a friend of my mum's, said Scarlet. She could see Bod now on the other side of the group of men, gesturing frantically to her to leave the men and follow him. She said as breezily as she could, he just popped out for a newspaper from the corner shop down there. And she closed the door behind her, stepped around the men, and began to walk away. Where are you going? Asked the man with the mustache. I've got to catch a bus, she said. Scarlet walked up the hill towards the bus stop and graveyard and resolutely did not look back. Pod walked beside her. Even to Scarlet he seemed shadowy in the deepening dusk, like something that was almost not there, a shimmer of heat, haze, a skittery leaf that for a moment had seemed to be a boy. Walk faster, said Bod. They're all looking at you, but don't run. Who are they? Asked Scarlet quietly. I don't know, said Bod, but they all felt weird, like they weren't properly people. I want to go back and listen to them. Of course they're people, said Scarlet. She walked up the hill as fast as she could without actually running, no longer certain that Bod was by her side. The four men stood at the door to number 33. I don't like this, said the big man with the bull neck. You don't like this, Mr. Tar? Said the white-haired man. None of us like it. All wrong. Everything's going wrong. Krakow's gone. They aren't answering. And after Melbourne and Vancouver, said the man with the mustache, for all we know, we four are all that's left. Quiet, please, Mr. Ketch, said the white-haired man. I'm thinking. All right, that's going to have to do it for me tonight. We'll finish the rest of this chapter tomorrow. But thank you very much for joining me. Have a great evening. Happy end of school. I'll finish the rest of this book tomorrow and probably on Friday. So have a good night. Take care of yourselves and your families and keep reading. Take care.